It's the Wednesday Wisdom Show, and you need to know, what are the 10 Sephirot? People are fascinated by the 10 Sephirot, and you see them in all kinds of explanations that you'll find, say, in New Age, and in concordances and charts that show how they are similar to other ideas and other paths and so on. And the basic concept is that these are sort of energy centers of some sort, and that the universe is created this way. And if we could understand what happens, in the first Sephirah, and what happens in the second one, and then the third and the fourth and so on, if we could sort of track all of that, we would begin to understand how matter manifests, or how to build things the way that that God made things. Now, it's understandable that people would see it this way, and once you begin to understand what they are and what they are not, you'll see why people do feel that way about it. Let me start here, because that's really wrong. It's the inverse, actually, of what they are. Human consciousness is a single small constricted point inside of a field of forces, of influences, of waves, of fields. And they are, according to how we feel them, they are vast and beyond our perception. In fact, that field of influence and of forces are what exists, and matter actually does not exist. Matter itself has got to do very much with the quality of human perception in its natural, unevolved form. In other words, we see those forces according to our quality. And human beings are constructed, our consciousness, our sensibility, and our perception has a particular construction that was given to us by the forces that built the whole system. And it's reflected in what we call our body. But it's not about body at all. Everything that we see is really, what form are the forces in us? What shape do they take? And we can clearly see that as far as our perception, our apprehension of the larger place that we're at, we only see from one particular angle. And yet the longing of the heart and the whole adventure of life has got to do with going beyond that angle and being able to see more. It's why we explore, say, on the physical level and so on. So we have this impulse in us to be able to sense what's outside of us. Now, between what's outside of us and what's inside of us, we have this sort of mediating channel that we call our senses. And we can see their structure, and this has got to do with why there are 10 Sephirot. Before I explain what Sephirot are, you can see in the way in which human consciousness is built that we have, on one hand, we have 5, on the other hand, we have 5, and that our senses are also built that way. We have what we call 5 senses, 5 ways of interpreting what is going on outside of us. Now, the way that Kabbalah looks at it, and why the science of Kabbalah has determined that there are 10 Sephirot, is that we're talking about the limitations of human perception and how to go beyond them, because that is the vector, the direction of life. That's where our fulfillment is. That is what we consider life, to go from a restricted perception into an inclusive kind of perception. Human happiness is like that. All pleasure comes from that kind of thing. We call it one thing or another, but remember that there's actually no matter. There are no forms other than our grasp of these forces that we call pleasure. So Kabbalah is a very practical methodology, a science of perceiving the larger, of what to do in order to perceive outside of the limitations, the current limitations of human awareness, in order to live fully in that larger reality. The limiting factor between the inability to see beyond that small angle and the ability to live in that larger reality, Kabbalists call the will to receive. We call it the ego, and we give it all kinds of moral connotations. And of course, since it is a limiting factor, it makes us dumber, it makes us less aware of where we're walking, what we're doing, who we're hurting or who we're helping. It just makes us dumb. Why? Because our perception is so narrow. So when you look at the five senses are human perception inside of the will to receive or inside of the ego. They don't tell us anything about the larger, complete sort of objective reality. The 10 Sephirot are human organs of perception outside of the limitations of the ego. They're exactly the same system, but not incarcerated inside of the perception of the self. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, but just for a little bit of understanding, even though human perception inside of the ego is arranged in five senses, these five senses have kind of two qualities. They have a kind of a positive and a negative quality within the ego. So they really are, they're kind of like 10, right? You have five senses on the positive side, you have five senses on the negative side. And so this whole structure of consciousness exists inside of us in this way. Outside of us, we're really talking about a wholeness. So 10 Sephirot outside of the ego, or the sense organs outside of the ego, represent contact with a complete whole. We're not really trying to break them down into what does this one mean and that one mean and that one mean. We are trying to get the separation that exists within human awareness, that are these 10 aspects within human perception, to meld into one and reflect the oneness or the completeness or the integral, holistic whole of consciousness outside of human awareness. So there is no particular factor that we can understand in our ego about what's in Keter, what's in Chokhmah, Bina, and the path between them somehow evokes some kind of magical thing, and it's complete nonsense. What we are trying to do when we are not working with the limiting factor of the ego is to sense that complete whole of awareness, not broken down into five senses and, multiplied by 2. Don't take this too literally. This is it's really an emotional way of explaining the difference between inside of us and outside of us. Now let's talk about outside of us. Kabbalah is very practical. It takes the structure of human awareness, which is what we call the worlds and so on. There are 5 worlds. Why 5 worlds? Because we're talking again about how do you free the limitation of human awareness to make contact with the forces outside of ourselves and to see that as our life. Sounds very mystical, right? Well, let's focus it right back down into the tools that nature has actually given us. In order for a person to contact and live in that holistic reality, we experience it through the things that nature has given us, through the structures that it's given us, not just the ones that are inside of us, not just the ones that are in our intellect, but everything, including other people, are part of our own consciousness. It's just that we exile people to the outside of what we consider to be self. So what Kabbalah is trying to do in order to regain access to this whole is that we arrange a relationship that reflects human awareness outside of the ego. That's what the 10 Sephirot are. So specifically, there is this concept called a minyan. Minyan are 10. And religion understands this as you cannot pray until there are 10 men present. What are men? Man simply means a tendency towards the same quality as the Creator. It has nothing to do with gender at all. It has to do with being 10 altruistic particles. 10 altruistic particles that are attempting to feel the commonality of consciousness between them, so that it reflects the larger reality. Again, this sounds like outside of the ability of humans, but it is very practical and totally doable. So this so-called prayer simply means to make this altruistic connection with others. And by doing that within 10, why 10? Because 10 reflects the altruistic form of human awareness. And that's done using the tools that we were given by setting up a relationship, say a circle of 10 people, and finding that commonality between them that begins to reflect the quality of the larger system. It works. It's like dead simple. But we don't give it its true value. We completely underestimate the things that are in front of us because we measure everything through the 5 senses inside of the ego. That's all that the 10 Sephirot are. They are an array within the person seeking contact with the objective reality, which is the Creator, which is the force of bestowal. And to any degree that people feel this kind of commonality between 10 people, and 10, again, is not actually a number. 10 simply means that it's a quality that reflects the quality, the integral quality of nature, or in other words, the altruistic quality of the Creator. And these are all terms for things that actually exist in human awareness and in the transition from limited human awareness to a more complete human awareness, from a limited human to a complete human, from an unethical way of relating to a totally ethical way of relating. And all that means is leaving this limited space that gives us only a small slice of reality. We connect to the whole of reality through the channels between the 10 Sephirot, in other words, between 10 people who are all aimed at this same thing. And it's what happens in the sort of simulation in the methodology that people do in a very simple, straightforward human way, in the fact that they're all aimed at the same thing, that they're aimed at that quality, at helping others to perceive that quality, to touch it, to live in it. And what actually happens is through doing this, we leave that egoistic sense. It's not that we lose it ever. Actually, our sense of self, so to speak, of our ability to contribute, our perceptions, they're sweetened by many, many times. Kabbalists call it 620 times. It simply means that it moves from its limitation into its wholeness and into its fulfillment. So 10 Sephirot are not 10 separate things. They are the way that human consciousness connects with unity. I'm sure you're going to have questions. I'd love to answer them, so put them in the comments below. And please support us so that we can talk to a lot of people and we can hear from a lot of people. So slam that notification bell, like, and share.